So I'm under the assumption that anyone watching this video has at least played one of the versions of Persona 3, so this video will tackle a few spoilers here and there, and don't say I didn't warn you. In late 2019, I had just finished Persona 5 for the first time. It took me a little over a year to go through it, but needless to say, it quickly became one of my favorite games of all time and changed my life. Soon after that, I decided to emulate Persona 3 because I had lost my childhood PS2 a few years prior and hadn't bought a new one at that point. I didn't know much about the other Persona games, but P3 interested me the most. Throughout the first half of 2020, I played P3 as much as possible, but while I was playing that, I also bought a Vita and started P4. It was back and forth between these two games for me, but I ended up finishing P3 first. Watching that ending for the first time just utterly destroyed me. It's easily one of my favorite video game endings ever, and after I wrapped up the game, it quickly became one of my favorite games I ever played. Since before I even played the original, I heard of people talking about the idea of a remake, and I was personally all for it. The little I knew about the game at the time looked so cool, so to potentially get a modern version of it just sounded nice to me. Especially with the existence of Persona 3 Dancing giving us a small glimpse into what one could be like. I even made a little UI mock-up during study hall back in high school. It's not very good looking back at it, but I was really proud of it at the time. Anyway, when Reload ended up getting leaked, it didn't feel real to me, but I could already tell this was going to be a special game to me, and wow, who would have guessed? I loved it. Persona 3 in general is my favorite game in the series, but if I have to choose one to be my favorite, it would easily be Reload. That being said, it doesn't replace FES or Portable, and I still want to go back to them in the future. Every version of P3 has their strengths and weaknesses, and I love them all for a variety of reasons. FES has the advantage of being an upgraded version of the vanilla P3 experience, Portable has the female protagonist, and Reload is a modernized version of that FES experience. Each of them has something different going for it, while still being Persona 3 at the end of the day. You can't go wrong with any version, even if I'll personally recommend FES or Reload for a first playthrough. Alright, enough talking. Let's ramble about Reload for a while. One thing that hit me instantly when getting into the meat of Reload was how faithful Tartarus is, while adding and improving on it to make it even more interesting. I always liked it in the original, but I remember thinking things dragged just a bit towards the end. In Reload though, they nearly perfected Tartarus. The interior having more depth and scale really adds to the game's atmosphere. It makes the climb up Tartarus feel more impactful, with reaching a new block feeling like this huge achievement. The larger scale makes getting around shadows easier than before, but most of the time I was rushing head on into the enemy anyway, especially after unlocking the upgraded ambush. There's a new currency called Twilight Fragments that can be used to open chests. They can be found in various places around Tatsumi Port Island, and Elizabeth gives you some for any quests you do. It always felt really satisfying finding these and seeing what was inside the chest I'd come across throughout Tartarus. The healing clock at the entrance uses these now instead of money, which was a good way to make these fragments even more useful. There's another clock now called the Great Clock that you can find at random if you've used fragments at some point during your Tartarus trip. These allow you to level up party members who are at a lower level than the pro tag, which fixes one of my issues with the original where I had party members falling behind in levels if I wasn't entirely focused on using them at the time. The mini bosses, or as they're called in Reload, gatekeepers, were the low point of Tartarus for me. In the original, they were these insane damage sponges, and they were just overly hard compared to the rest of the game. Even the main bosses were usually easier than these. When I fought them in Reload, I ended up being shocked that they not only took less time to defeat, but were just much easier in general. Sometimes a little too easy. It felt like the team overcorrected with these bosses. This is where the reworked monad depths come in. In the original game, it was an optional block for the endgame. Here, they show up fairly early on and have these mini bosses that are a perfect blend of being a decent challenge while not being too much of a damage sponge. I imagine they made the gatekeeper fights easier in order to make these monad fights a little more challenging, but it leads into a problem most have with Reload, and that's it being overly easy. I definitely think Reload is a much easier game than the original, but I don't think it's brain dead either. In addition to the game that helps make it an easier experience are the Theurgy attacks. These are the P3 equivalent of the Showtime attacks that were introduced in Persona 5 Royal. They're basically these insanely powerful skills with flashy animations, and they're unlocked very early on after Fuka joins the party and Seize gets their new equipment. I love these outfits, by the way. I think the addition of these adds a fresh mechanic to P3's gameplay loop, and I do like them overall, but the balancing of them could have been tweaked. Every Theurgy in the game ignores all resistances, so you can end up cheesing fights with them. I absolutely demolished almost every phase of Nyx with these and beat it in my first attempt. I still had some close calls there, but watching Nyx go down so quickly was both entertaining and baffling. I thought it was really neat having the fusion spells be tied to theurgy now. I do wish you needed to have the personas equipped rather than just needing them in the compendium, so it would allow the player to go out of their way to unlock these, but otherwise it's a nice way of keeping the mechanic in while tying it to this new one. Part of me wants to do a playthrough eventually where I don't use any of the theurgies, just to see how the balance is affected by it. It's a fun mechanic, but it could use some work in terms of balancing. Baton passes from P5 make a return in the form of the shift mechanic. The only difference here is that the attack doesn't increase for the party member you shift it to. I'm honestly happy with that change though, because it keeps the mechanic a little more balanced than before. The thing most people wanted when it came to a P3 remake was the removal of the original tactics system, and to just give us direct commands while not being a visual novel like Portable. Reload ends up doing this, and while I personally like the original tactics system, I tend to prefer controlling my party members anyway. You still have an optional tactics system for those who prefer it. I didn't personally try it out at all in Reload on my initial playthrough, but from what I hear, the new tactics system is worse here, with the removal of certain tactics and the AI just not doing certain actions like shifting or not buffing and debuffing. Part of this isn't entirely Reload's fault, as it's been an issue since Persona 4 and has been there in every game since. The removal of the fatigue system is one I welcome, honestly. After a certain point in the original, it wasn't ever an issue for me, and I honestly forgot it even existed after a while when I first played the game, so not including it here really didn't matter to me. A few features with Fuka's navigation were added. She now has an SP bar of her own, and it can be used throughout Tartarus or in battle. In Tartarus, she can use actions like making the party invisible to shadows, and honestly, I never used this once because I didn't see the point in ever using it. The SP bar mostly comes in handy in battle, where she can scan all of the weaknesses of an enemy after the first turn of a battle. While the male party members still don't have a social link outside of the female protag in Portable, we still do kinda get them with the new linked episodes. They don't just apply for the party members, as Takaya and Ryoji have one. These don't rank up like social links do and only show up during certain parts of the story, but I loved these. They're a great expansion of these characters, and their arcs don't feel out of place with the rest of the game. Spin-offs like Persona 4 Arena had some issues with writing when it came to returning characters, mainly Akihiko, but here he's written mostly fine and didn't feel out of place with his writing in the main game. Shinji's linked episode was without a doubt the best one, as it gives him more screen time before his death and makes you more attached to him as a result. It focuses on Mitsuru and Akihiko attempting to get him to return to school by filling out the reinstatement form needed so that they could fulfill their promise of graduating together. Mitsuru asks Makoto to get involved, as she feels he could be the one to get through to him and change his mind. Shinji refuses to do so throughout the linked episode, but after his death, Mitsuru and the protagonist find his paperwork laying on his desk while cleaning out his room. It's blank except for his signature, showing that he thought about their promise and potentially planned to go back to school, even knowing he'd die anyway. It's such a heartbreaking end to it, but it's just so good. I love Shinji even more than I already do because of this. Outside of the linked episodes, there's other new activities within the dorm. This part of the dorm that was empty in the original game is now a kitchen that can be used to cook with different party members. The location and the design of the kitchen was lifted directly from the Persona 3 movies, which I thought was really cool. You can also read, watch TV, have study sessions, and plant vegetables in the garden. All of these help to give more to do at nighttime, which was something that was lacking in Persona 3 until now. This game looks beautiful. It's a different take on P3's visuals, yeah, but I think it keeps the vibe of the original game intact for the most part. I can only think of two locations that are major downgrades, those being the dorm and the October full moon boss. The second one is oddly specific, but like, why is it so bright here? It's even worse when you have an HDR display, and it just genuinely hurts my eyes looking at it. The dorm's visuals would be fine, and I did adjust to them over time, but the vibe of it is just lost in Reload with how bright it is compared to the original game. It doesn't feel nearly as cozy with the lighting changes. You could have probably gotten away with the bright look if the lighting didn't look so flat here. In January, the dorm gets a muted palette to reflect the mood of the story at that point. On paper, this is a cool idea, but they kinda executed it poorly. It just looks off, and the lighting still being this flat doesn't help it. It would have been a better idea if they mixed ideas from both Reload's dorm and the originals by going with the Reload approach for most of the game, but you know, less flat. And then when January rolls around, the dorm would look closer to the original game with the lights dimmed. That way you could still set the mood that the game is going for at that point. Otherwise, the visuals are stunning. The team did a really great job recreating all these locations, and every time I would get to a certain point in the story, I'd wonder how they'd pull it off with the new visuals, and I was just stunned throughout. Oh, and the models look really nice here. I never hated P5's models, but looking back at them, they had an issue with their eyes and just being too far apart, making them look a little goofy when viewed up close. Meanwhile, in Reload, they fixed that issue and basically perfect the series art style in the process. Going forward, I want future future Persona games to have models closer to what Reload did because they just looked so good. You could really tell they were proud of them with how often they stick to the in-engine cutscenes rather than the 2D cutscenes, and I don't blame them. Moments like Chidori's death, Shinji's death, and the ending of the game hit even harder here with how well they executed each scene. The animations for the Theurgy attacks help make these models shine too. I find pretty much all of these to be a little more interesting than the Showtime attacks in Royal. I especially love Junpei's Blaze of Life, mostly for this end animation with Chidori. It's too cute. I still really like the new 2D animated scenes. The original 2D scenes went off model pretty often. There's even a part in Shinji's death where you can see two Makotos in the same shot. I still like them, and I even miss the more surreal visuals some scenes had, but they were a little wonky in a few places. These new scenes are more consistent overall and still fits P3's tone despite looking more like P5's anime scenes and not feeling as surreal. Some of the scenes they chose to be in-engine versus 2D animated are a little odd though. Makoto's awakening really should have been 2D. The awakening from the original game is still the best version of it. It had this vibe that is just unmatched. The moment begins really tense and hits you with an exhilarating feeling once the awakening fully kicks in. The Reload version isn't awful, it opts for a mix of portable and the movie's awakening, but the original scene just can't be beat. It's too good. Oh my god, the new UI. Atlus showed that pause menu in the very first trailer, and it's clear why. This is pure eye candy. There's a focus on an underwater motif, which is a perfect choice for the design. Reload's art director specifically says in an interview that the UI reflects the protagonist's heart and his relationships. They even used the game's setting of being on an island as an inspiration, which is something I always assumed went into the making of it. It's such a well thought out UI, aesthetically, mechanically, and narratively. It's a perfect evolution of P5's UI while still being its own thing. I love the credits sequence having Makoto sink slowly to the bottom of the sea with images of his friends and memories behind him, as if he's sinking deeper into his own hearts and those bonds he's formed throughout the game, ending off with him fully fading away and the sea fading into a fully black background. He's reached the bottom of that sea, his journey and life coming to a close. It's just a credit sequence at the end of the day, but it's one that you could tell was built with so much care and love. This one's a bit random, but I don't see anyone point this out, but they even take some inspiration from unused content found in the original game. The pose for Makoto's battle stance in Reload is the exact same as this unused one, and the battle UI seems to be inspired by this UI mock-up. RE4 Remake did a similar thing with Leon's jacket and Ashley's design being lifted from RE 3.5, and I loved it there. More remakes should restore cut content like this. All out attack finishers from P5 were added in, and I love how these look. They have a more minimalist look compared to P5's, but I think I might like these finishers a little more. Not a huge fan of the shuffle time being played in between the finisher instead of after, but I got used to it eventually. The soundtrack, dude. The original P3 has one of my favorite video game soundtracks ever, and Reload soundtrack is, for the most part, on par with the originals for me. I know a lot of people have issues with the new female vocalist, but honestly, I didn't see any issue with how she approached both the old music and the new music. She did a great job, even with the music that were slight downgrades compared to the original. The new music is so good. The opening song, Full Moon, Full Life, has been in my head since they dropped the opening before launch, and the intro itself is beautiful. The new ambush battle theme, It's Going Down Now, is probably my new favorite battle theme in the series. They even gave us a new night theme with Color Your Night, and as expected, it's peak. Most of the remixed music is either on par or an upgrade for me, with only a select few being worse, and even then it's not that much worse for me. Changing Seasons comes to mind instantly. This one is just a huge upgrade from the original, easily. Burn My Dread Last Battle is another one that comes to mind. The song was already one of the most powerful ones in the original, but the remix is just flat out better. The new lyrics make it feel so much more personal, the lyrics being written from Makoto's perspective and his appreciation for the bonds he's formed over the course of the game. At first I didn't care for the Iwatodai Dorm remix, but it grew on me over the course of the game. The new lyrics make it sound somehow more cheesy than the original, but I think I love it for that. I know the original Mass Destruction is so iconic, but the new version is honestly underrated. I don't see the hate for this one. Memories of the City was always a favorite of mine from the original, as it perfectly fit the vibes and atmosphere that final month of the game gives off. And throughout my playthrough of Reload, I was eager to hear how they'd remix this one, and thankfully it did not disappoint. I definitely prefer the original version, but it's pretty close. Both set the mood well, but the new version feels a bit too clean in some areas, while the original feels a bit rougher and helps set that mood more. The new Memories of You is beautiful. This one was pretty much on par with the original, but that violin solo in the middle is incredible, but for some reason they've removed that solo from the soundtrack release, and I will never understand understand why. I could honestly go on and on with the new soundtrack, that's just so good. When they revealed the entire voice cast would be replaced, I was a little skeptical. P3's voice cast was so iconic, and I was afraid the new voices wouldn't sound as good. Thankfully, I was wrong. This new cast is amazing. All of them did a stellar job voicing these characters. I especially love Junpei's new voice. You could tell Zeno Robinson had a blast doing the role, and every moment with him was perfectly done. There are some scenes that I think were done better in the original. The Ace Detective scene comes to mind, but I think that's mainly down to the new voice direction for Yukari being less sassy at times. It's insane just how close the new Mitsuru voice is to the original. It's hard to tell it's even a different actor, but she does an even better job here, despite the voice being such a close match. Her father's death scene comes to mind specifically. I also love that every social link is now fully voiced, and it really helped make me appreciate these characters more. Actually being able to hear the tone in their voices really helps with that. Just reading lines in your head doesn't always sell a character fully. Akanari was always my favorite social link in P3, but actually hearing him makes it hurt even more when he eventually passes away. I felt closer to his character than ever before just by hearing his voice. Maiko's social link also hit even harder by having a voice attached to her. This link was always a highlight for me with how hard-hitting the story of her parents' divorce and how Maiko copes with it, but I grew to appreciate it even more. It's all around a really good voice cast for both the main characters and social link, and I hope some of these actors return to the series in some form in the future. Atlus has never done a full-on remake like this before, and for the first time they did an amazing job. Reload being almost everything I wanted and more, and it succeeds as being a great example on how to do a remake right. It's the definitive version of Persona 3 in my eyes, and while it's not perfect, I highly recommend it whether you're a fan of the original game or a newcomer to the series. If they remake P1, the P2 duology, or P4 next, I'm there for it. P4 would probably be the game I'd want them to remake last, as it doesn't necessarily need a remake at the moment, but I'd still be really interested to see how a remake of that game would end up. Persona 6 is also likely to get revealed any day now, and we have Persona 5X and the upcoming Episode Aegis remake DLC, and I'm really interested to see more of that soon. Whatever the future holds for this series, I'll be there, and I can't wait for more. Yo, this is the end of the video. So I haven't done a video proper in 6 years, I think, almost 7, and I decided to just, reboot the channel basically. I pretty much unlisted or privated all my old videos from back then. I'm not really proud of those nowadays, and I wanted to just do a fresh start for the channel, reboot everything, and hopefully this was a good fresh start. I was pretty proud of it, and we'll see what the future holds for this channel.